There's an old legend, I don't know if it's true or not, that the emperor of Rome, Marcus Aurelius, after winning the battle, they would have parades through the streets for days, sometimes weeks, right? A huge celebration, celebrating their victory, celebrating the land and the things that they've won. Right? It was a massive celebration that lasted a long time. Around for however long that celebration was, he hired that person to follow him around and whisper one simple phrase every so often. Whenever they were out in the streets celebrating with great songs and praise, parades, this person would be walking behind him, whispering, "Memento mori, memento mori, memento mori." Wherever he went for those celebratory days, memento mori. It means remember that you will die. Remember death. Why would someone in the midst of celebration, in the midst of joy, choose to be reminded that he's going to die one day? When you come forward for ashes, you'll hear those words, "Remember that you are dust, and unto dust you shall return." We're no different. It's good for us to be reminded, as awesome as it may be, as incredible and beautiful and terrifying and sad as it can be, all of it will come to an end. And we say this not to bring us down, but in fact to remind ourselves that are we taking hold of the opportunity of, before we return to dust, before we return to ash, are we doing everything we should be doing? Are we grasping life with all that we have and all that we are? Are we living it outwardly? Because the gospel says, Jesus says, do not do these things outwardly, as the hypocrites do. He's speaking in hyperbole, right? He's exaggerating. He's not saying that he doesn't want people to pray in crowds. He's not saying that. He's speaking to people who outwardly do lots of things and have zero interior transformation. I don't think there's one person among us who was not in some way, some shape, some form, interiorly transformed this past year. Who's not interiorly transformed by all the outward ways in which we had to change our lives. Not having a sports season, having to wear a mask, not having homecoming, not having a football season, not being able to do lots of things. What person was not interior transformed? The reality is this: on a day in which we willingly fast, we're united. We're united by the fact that we all face the same reality in the end. We may have tons and tons of differences with people around us, political, socioeconomic, whatever, cultures, whatever, languages, whatever. All of that may separate us, but this much we know is true. Remember that you are dust, and unto dust you shall return. Fasting is just one way in which we unite ourselves with all of those around us. There's, of course, a spiritual dimension. We've talked about it. But the physical, the human dimension, is that we get to experience in some small, tiny way for just 2 days out of the whole year what people experience every day of their life. Real hunger. We get to choose to do that as a way to unite ourselves with them. They who don't have a choice, and we who have a lot of choices also don't have some choices. And so rather than focus on the fact that we will return to dust, we focus on the reality of what that phrase should do for us. That is, help us to live that time before. Some of the greatest moments of hope for this past year for me is hearing how some students handled everything. Right? I learned a new instrument. I got to know my family in a deeper way. We started board game night or movie night. I learned to communicate with my friends. Some of you have formed real friendships. I saw a lot of fake friendships for the first 2 years of my priesthood here at St. Joe's. This past year, I've seen more real friends than I have in those past 2 years combined. Why? Because the reality of the fact that we will return to. But you had to choose it. You may feel like you didn't have a lot of choices, but apathy, shutting down, anger, cynicism, while some of it may be justly earned, it's always a choice. At this Lenten season, the Lord provides us an opportunity, a choice, to make this season an opportunity to grow and to change. But like every season before it, we have to choose it. It's our choice. How are we going to enter into it? How are we going to fast also produces the how are we going to feast and what feast is available. One of the students showed me a video this past week. It's a video of a guy recreating his favorite movie scene. If you've ever seen the movie Perks of Being a Wallflower, it's the scene where he drives through the tunnel standing in the bed of a truck. Very dangerous. Let me say this right now. I do not condone this whatsoever, period. But this person was so moved by the scene in the movie that he had to recreate it. He had to make it happen in his life. And it took months of planning. A lot of videotaping. All of this. But he was so moved by that particular experience that he thought, I too have to have that. The reality of what our Lord is asking in the gospel today, of doing these things in your room alone, he doesn't address the reality of what happens when we do them outwardly. Not because he thinks they're not true, but because he's addressing the people of his time, his period. He's addressing those sins. That context. In this context, we need people who outwardly live those things because they have already inwardly had that transformation. And inspire so that you see them and you see how happy they are and you say, what is going on? I want that. Not necessarily because all of their externals were perfect, but because they, in some small way, maybe not all at once, but in little ways, daily, chose that even though the world would remind them, memento mori, he said, I'm not dead yet. Even though the world may remind them, remember that you are dust and then to dust you shall return, you say, I'm not dust yet. But we are called to be an outward sign or a symbol. Which is ironic because this year, we're not going to receive ashes in the very same way that we normally do, not a smear on the forehead. We're going to receive them in the ways in which they were given originally. In fact, the Holy Father, the Pope, has always received ashes in this way. When you come forward, you bow your head, and you're sprinkled with the ashes on the top of your head. The same words said, remember that you are dust, and unto dust you shall return. But we don't need a big flashy sign or a symbol. We don't need to walk down the street and have the crucifix on our foreheads. We need a life outwardly lived. You all need someone in your life who's outwardly living it. You need to be that someone in someone else's life, whatever the case may be. But this Lenten season is an opportunity for each and every one of us, for you and for me, to take hold of the opportunity of this season. So that before the end of our life, before the season of our life is over, before we do return to dust, we can say, Lord, all those opportunities you gave me, I took hold of. Even though I didn't do it perfectly, even though I struggled, I stumbled, I fell, Lord, I still tried. That the world needs people who try. And that begins here.